Here at the Proximity Podcast, we live in the dangerous middle, holding these tensions in love, full of grace and truth. This podcast should be seen both as a conversation and a connection with our friends and neighbors to talk about the things that matter most. Not every view that is shared on the Proximity Podcast is the opinion or the value of Mission Church. These sessions that are to follow are a part of a series we're calling The Separation of Church and Hate, as we dig into the idea of how followers of Jesus respond in moments where there may be division or polarization, and how to step into those conversations and dialogue. Today, I am honored to be joined by Dr. Michelle Reyes. She is a scholar, she's a speaker, she's an author, award-winning author of Becoming All Things, How Small Changes Lead to Lasting Connections Across Cultures. Can I say a big welcome to you, Dr. Reyes?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
So tell me a little bit about this award you won, and how does it make you feel? Are you a celebrity now? Are you trending? What's going on?
Oh goodness. No. Take me right back off that platform. No, so my book, Becoming All Things, came out in 2021, and it won the ECPA book award in 2022. That's the Evangelical Christian Book Association, and was just really grateful for that award. And I think just the timing of it, not that I planned the timing of my book to coincide with all of the cultural and social upheaval that was happening in our country, but I think it was a book for the time, and was able to really help equip a lot of Christians and churches navigate what felt like cultural landmines during the pandemic, during a lot of those upheavals.
That's so great. We're encouraged by it. I've been reading through your book and getting a chance to see both the theological depth and just the heart towards reaching all people. And one of the things I just want to say is, in many ways, there's a sense of humility and understanding in the cross-cultural relationships that you're kind of speaking towards and leading us towards as people of Jesus, people who want to follow and look like Jesus in the way that he naturally builds relationships. So let me say, again, welcome. Thank you. We've chatted a little bit just in the nature of your relationships and ministry. You actually hold a couple of degrees now. Can you give us a little bit of your educational background for fun?
Oh, sure. I jokingly say I have a checkered professional career in the sense that, so my PhD is in Germanic studies. I actually began my career as a German professor. I taught at the University of Illinois, Chicago, as well as Moody Bible Institute in downtown Chicago. But what's interesting, the through line, if you will, is that I studied global multiculturalism. So I studied Hebrew and Yiddish and German, of course, and was studying European migration around world wars, looking at the border crossings of Jews from Russia to Germany to Israel. And so a lot of that global multiculturalism then translated to multicultural church planting, which then, sowed the seeds for the book that I ended up writing.
Wow. So you don't know this about me, but the name Schaffner is a German Jewish name. And apparently my great-grandfather came over right before the World Wars, 1 and 2, if I understand correctly. I may not. So if my dad's listening to this podcast, he may have to send me correct dates. But I had the privilege, or I guess in many ways, just the shocking experience to go to Auschwitz and to stand there and to see the gas chambers, and just my heart breaks, and yet to see the redemptive potential from our family and how we had a chance to come across the big pond, so to speak, and to the United States, and how they began to live out their life and live in ministry. So anyway, so in many ways, you would be both a history buff and you know German really well. So congratulations on that. That's well beyond me.
That's really neat. I was curious about your ethnic roots. Schaffner in German means conductor. But of course, a lot of times when people immigrated, they changed their names or made tweaks to their names. So it could mean a variety of things. But yeah, that's really neat.
Name of origin is always something interesting to talk through somebody's identity. And, so if you were a Schaffner, the way you would talk about your heritage is it means the word conductor, and then you're supposed to finish with a woot woot at the end. So next time you get a chance to talk to your friends about your German friends, we can do that. So, hey, let's jump into our conversation today, because today, honestly, we're going to talk about in proximity. We specifically want to address the idea of unity. Understanding that God has given us a spirit of unity and desires for the people of God to have a relationship of unity. And for us, as we jump into this whole concept, I'd like to use the picture sometimes that our world and even our churches look more like a 7th grade dance these days, or a middle school dance where girls are on one side, guys are on the other. Everybody's holding the wall and nobody's going to dance. And God has invited us into a great dance to find this dangerous middle. What is the opportunity before us that we could have today? And so I'm going to just jump right in. And I want to reference a couple of passages. First and foremost, I want to start with John chapter 17. This is known as Jesus's prayer, and it's the prayer of unity. But twice he makes this statement, my prayer is this. It's the prayer that God would not take them out of the world, but they would protect them from the evil one. And second, as prayer for them not alone. I also pray for those who believe in me through their message. So twice Jesus is making this broad statement of unity, that his real heart, his real prayer, his request before God is this holding of unity amongst the believers of Jesus. And can you just take a moment and speak into how John 17 begins to percolate across your heart and mind?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I love those passages. I think it's safe to say that anything Jesus brings up is a big deal. So unity is obviously a big deal to Jesus. But I also think that because Jesus is praying for unity, it obviously means that unity doesn't just happen on its own. If Jesus has to pray for it, that means that it is difficult.
Yeah.
It's going to take some work for the body of Christ to really step into. I think what comes to mind for me when thinking about biblical unity across cultures, and even kind of going back to my book and the time that my book came out, it's really interesting, Danny. Pre-2020, I was still talking about culture, cultural identity, cross-cultural engagement, but the conversation often went like this. I would talk with majority white culture type Christians, and they would tell me things like, you're making too big of a deal of culture. This isn't an important issue. And they would even sometimes point blank tell me cultural identities don't matter. They would bring up the passage Galatians 3:26 through 28, right? There is neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free. We're all one in Christ Jesus, and say, see, our spiritual oneness in Christ is the only thing that matters. And what's interesting about that line of argument is they're implying that neither our ethnicity, nor our gender, nor our social status matters as believers. And to that, I'd say, well, not really, right?
Yeah.
Because biblical unity, particularly when we're thinking of the diverse body of Christ, biblical unity does not mean sameness, right? Being in Christ doesn't mean that we flatten our cultural identities. It simply means that our cultural distinctives no longer pose as a barrier for us to be able to worship God and fulfill the Great Commission together. And by cultural distinctives, I mean everything from our languages to our unique values, our stories, heritage, tradition, even our ways of life. And I wrote all about this in the first chapter of my book, actually, Becoming All Things. But I think what this means, biblical unity across cultures, it means that we don't separate or break apart from each other simply because we're culturally different. And I think as believers, we cannot allow cultural differences to undo the glue that is Jesus. We have to choose to sit in the discomfort and work through things instead of saying, well, I prefer to just serve Jesus around people that think and look like me. And I maybe this is a hard truth, Danny, but I can't tell you how many white Christians I've seen over the years get really gung-ho about the idea of like a multicultural church, serving in a multicultural church or serving in a diverse neighborhood. And a month in, 2 months in, they're the first people to leave because they can't handle being in a place that potentially centers people of other cultures. And so I think for a multicultural church to succeed, for a diverse body of believers to succeed, we have to be able to first shift our mindsets to understand and embrace discomfort as part of what it means to be the unified body of Christ.
Well, it's funny. The landmine that's kind of in the middle there is, what is the diversity conversation? And the real discomfort is, am I willing to give up my comfort, my tradition, my sentimentality around church? And it doesn't matter what culture you're a part of. When you're in an established church of any sort, there's an established culture, there's an established tradition, and change is always tough. But then when you're talking about the nuances of relationship, community harmony, but we have to be reminded that unity oftentimes is held together in a tension of what we value most, as opposed to uniformity. Hey, this culture sets the standard and everybody else just gets on board. And that's a real challenge. But there's this tension, I think, between the vision that's cast by Jesus out of Revelation 7:9, a great multitude that nobody can count, of every tribe, tongue, and nation, and recognizing that that's who Jesus wants. And then the cultural backlash that we have today that oftentimes polarizes us. So let me press in a little bit more out of the book, because you do specifically take this conversation into 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23, which is a missiological anthem that oftentimes gets thrown about if we're going there or going here, this is how we need to approach the culture we're going to. But we don't necessarily recognize that this is really what Jesus first talked about, was loving our neighbor. It's now the world is now in our backyard. We don't have to go into all the world or go to the other side of the pond. We can actually go across the street or across our yard and love somebody and who they are in this dynamic. So unpack a little bit for me, just a little bit of a theological foundation, why 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23 makes so much of an important emphasis for us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love this passage. I love the Apostle Paul's ministry vision to become like the Jew to win the Jew, to become like the Gentile to win the Gentile, and this idea of I became all things to all people for the sake of the gospel. And the question that my book is really posing is, what would it look like for us as believers today to become all things to the people around us for the sake of the gospel, right? This isn't cultural adaptation or cultural erasure for some woke secular propaganda. Like this is leaning into who God has designed us to be as cultural beings and being culturally flexible for our own gospel witness. And so I think the Apostle Paul would say something to us today, and maybe even specifically to us Minnesotans today, like, I became like the Asian to win the Asian. I became like the Somalian to win the Somalian. I became like the Mexican to win the Mexican, and so on, as part of how we live out our faith, show the love of God to our neighbors and be a witness to all peoples. And so I wrote this book for the church. I was writing this book back in 2018, 2019, but throughout my life, and also throughout our marriage, Ari and I's marriage, we've lived in a lot of different places, from Minnesota to Chicago, Texas. We've lived abroad twice. We've lived in Germany and we've lived in Scotland. And we've attended a lot of different churches. And what I've seen literally around the world, so this isn't just a US problem, is that the church struggles to accommodate and adapt to others. And I think, as you were mentioning, the traditional approach of the church is to get people into our doors or through our doors. And once in, our goal is to change them, right? Which is not always, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's the point of discipleship and spiritual formation and all of this. But we aren't as knowledgeable or effective in adapting ourselves culturally to reach people where they're at. And here's an example. I'm a certified cultural intelligence facilitator. I do cultural trainings for churches, for pastors and pastoral staffs. And after a whole day of doing doing a cultural assessment and teaching and helping both the staff and the congregation be more prepared to reach the growing immigrant population around their church, one of the staff raised their hand. God bless him. But he asked me the question, so how long do we have to keep learning Spanish before we tell these newcomers that they need to learn English when they attend our church? I almost quit right then. I was like, cultural training over. But the point is, it's 2025. Like you said, the U.S. is more diverse than ever. The nations are surrounding our churches, and the church needs to have a deep, hard conversation with itself on how the church is going to become all things to all people for the sake of the gospel, and how that should impact positively how we think about everything from discipleship to outreach.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, sorry for the experience you've had where how long do we have to speak Spanish? Of course, you're probably a fan for German, and maybe in Minnesota, there's people who are really cheering for, let's go back. I'm not, I can't speak.
But it's a real question. I think a lot of people struggle with is like, okay, I'm adapting, but for how long, right? And I think it's the wrong question.
Yeah. And honestly, I think there's a bit of concern in our current culture with the globalization of the world, not just the United States. What really is our identity, both individually, nationally, spiritually? And a lot of generations are feeling that tension and that struggle, and they're expressing themselves in a variety of ways. Now, let me pull it back towards the responsibility of the church. So when we talk about unity, we're talking about a collective unity within the local church, but we're also talking about a unity in mindset that says those outside the church or those different than us, we become a bridge builder. We become somebody who doesn't say, hey, you come here to me and you adapt. It's okay. How will we love our neighbor? How will we care for our neighbor? How will we know our neighbor? How do we get to know and see people? And so there's this tension that we talk about being in a dangerous middle. It is held together with the love, both of Jesus and others, but it's held together in love, full of grace, full of truth, not just one or the other, okay? In Minneapolis, St. Paul, we have 100 different people groups. We have 300 different languages spoken. We're one of the most diverse global cities in the United States, period, and per capita especially. I mean, obviously, you go to Chicago, they're, 3-4 times our size. You go to LA, significantly larger than us. But in our 3.5 plus million people that live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region, there is a grand mosaic of, dare I say, a multitude that very few people can count of every tribe, tongue, and nation to be reached. So let's just talk about this for a moment. Can we press a little more into this becoming all things? What is at the heart of you stepping into this culture now that you're new to Minneapolis-St. Paul for a little over a year? What have you noticed, and what matters as you're building relationships in this community most to you?
Yeah. Well, Minnesota, man, it's hard coming from Texas culture to Minnesota culture because people up here don't eat tacos.
Well, they call them tacos, but they're not really tacos.
They don't mind telling you to your face, I don't like tacos. And I'm like, well, you need to come over for dinner or something.
Absolutely.
This is wrong. But yeah, I think, and this is true for Minnesotan culture. I think this is true for any urban diverse setting as well. Is that one of the most practical misunderstandings? Maybe faux pas, if you will, that I see people making up here, is just equating connections with the superficial aspects of culture with like true cultural adaptation, if that makes sense. Like learning a few words in a different language or eating tacos, or I remember talking with a gal who really hadn't had much interaction with Spanish-speaking people, but she was so excited to tell me how much she loved eating chips and queso. And I wanted to give her a hug and tell her, I said, you're going to need to do more than eat chips and queso to really engage with, Mexican immigrants at the border. But, I think that we oftentimes feel like cultural knowledge. I think cultural knowledge gets put on this platform that if you just know a few phrases and you've done some food exploration, or maybe you call yourself a foodie or something like that, you're winning at the cross-cultural connection game. But that is literally the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to cross-cultural engagement, and our efforts really aren't effective when it's just limited to knowledge. And I think this is why we have to shift our conversation to cultural intelligence, CQ, if you will. And CQ, this is the ability to effectively interact with people who are different from you. And it has 4 capabilities: CQ drive, CQ knowledge, CQ strategy, and CQ action. So drive, knowledge, strategy, action. And drive being you actually want to engage people who are different from you. You're curious. You see the personal benefits to cross-cultural engagement. Cultural knowledge is pretty straightforward. It's language, facts, knowing traditions and things about another culture. But strategy is actually having an awareness of what values the other person has. What's their story? What's the best words or behavior to interact with them? And then action is embodying that, kind of adapting on the fly, figuring out what works best, where to shift, all of that. And as I mentioned, I'm a CQ certified facilitator. I've done CQ assessments with over 800 leaders around the world. So pastors, missionaries, both in the US and abroad. All of my students at Wheaton College take an assessment in the courses I teach there. And what I have found across the board is that Christians who actually do want to do cross-cultural work score fairly high with their drive and their knowledge, but they score really, really low with their strategy and action. And what that tells me is that we have a lot of passionate people who just have no idea what they're supposed to do or say. And so I think the church, sending organizations, missionaries, we need to rethink our readiness training. We need to rethink things like strategic engagement as opposed to just learning language and cultural facts.
That's good. I would agree. I would think well-intended Christians find themselves stepping into saying, hey, I want to reach all people. Hey, I want to be more engaging. But then it's like, okay, so if we were to put, the rubber meets the road, maybe we just straight up say, then what are you willing to put down of your own cultural norms to raise up the connectivity of other groups? And even before we jumped on this podcast, I just said, hey, my ignorance and my naivety is a freedom chance for you to call a timeout at any point in this podcast and say, hey, I'd prefer this be approached this way, or I'd like you to speak to this way. So let's talk about just civil discourse. Can you give us some simple examples of, let's say, I've got, we're making this up, but let's say I have, neighbors that I hope to connect to, and culturally I want to reach out to them. What are a few, we'll start with low-hanging fruit. What are a few low-hanging fruit ideas we could do? And then how do we raise the bar to actually step into actual engagement and relationship of seeing, knowing, and understanding the people who live next to us?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I'll say this by way of example and story. So this is a little bit of an indictment on Minnesotan culture, which is very private, very individualist. My husband and I and our family, we moved up here a year ago, and we got immediately plugged into a church. We got immediately plugged into a Christian homeschool community. Tried our and kids' sports and all these things, like try to just normalize life as fast as possible. We've been here for a year. No one in any of these different spaces has ever invited us over for a meal. Not one. Not from our church, not from our school, not from our sports community, no one. And it's been one of the biggest cultural shocks of moving up here to Minnesota. Whereas in Texas, and we lived in a predominantly Latino and African-American community, it was very much an open door hospitality. People are just coming over unannounced, like, oh, we're eating now, or oh, we're having drinks now, or oh, okay, coffee is served. Like, it was just, we mingled in each other's lives so much more fluidly. And also no one has invited us to, especially those early days when we first came here and we're trying to figure out what church to go to. Nobody invited us. Hey, you want to come check out our church this Sunday? Hey, you want to come with us and we can grab lunch afterwards? None of that. So really, the lowest hanging possible fruit, I think, is just to invite people over for a meal, break bread together. And I think if it's a fellow believer, if you know this other person is a believer, invite them to come to your church. Say, hey, come this Sunday and then let's go have lunch afterwards. That I think truly it's a small gesture that doesn't really cost you much, but goes a long way to relationship building.
Yeah. Yeah. The incarnational relational table model is lost. It's lost in our parenting and home skills. It's lost in our neighboring relational build, relational connections, all those kind of scenarios. I think we find ourselves too busy, distracted, and then just too private. I mean, it's
right. Like, I don't want to bother you.
Yeah. Which it's unfortunate. So,
but I think, and this is a broad stroke.
Yeah.
But I'm bicultural Indian American. My husband's bicultural Mexican American. We're both children of immigrants. I think it is safe to assume that if you are interacting with someone who is an ethnic minority, they love being bothered. we love being invited for food. Like, that is the best way to connect. And so just that permission to get past your own nervousness of bothering somebody and just go do it.
Yeah. And so, it's obviously, it is a bit of a broad stroke because obviously, everybody has their own different personality, but hospitality is a bridge builder,
Yes.
And so talk to me a little bit about that a little bit. Just let's make this real personal. You gave us a snapshot of your ethnic heritage and your husband's ethnic heritage. And so you have a global village in your marriage. You have a global village in the household that you're a part of. Talk about just the nuances for this. And some people may want to just say, well, that's just their life. They understand that that's their culture. I'm assuming you had to learn a few things in this process too. Start with yourself, then talk about your marriage, and then talk about your household, if you would, just the implications of the complexities of those dynamics. Is that a fair question?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'll try to keep it all brief. I mean, a lot of my childhood and growing up experiences is referenced in my book, Becoming All Things, because I grew up, my family, so my mom, myself, my sister, like, we were the only, not just the only Indians or the only Asians, but the only brown-skinned people I knew. And so, I meet people all the time that are like, oh yeah, it wasn't until high school or college that I met my first African American, or I met my first Latino or something like that. And for me, it was like, since day one, since the day I was born, I was very aware of the fact that I was different in every possible way from everyone around me, my community, neighbors, church, classmates. And that formed me, right? That formed me, in terms of just how I tried to operate in the world, fit in, kind of that survival mode of, not wanting to stick out. And that's my journey of learning to fully embrace who God has made me to be and take like a God-given pride in that, celebrate that, and also now help others find their way across those gaps, those cultural gaps. So that's a very brief snapshot of my personal story and the passion that I have. In my home, in our family home, my mom speaks Hindi and Gujarati. My husband's mom speaks Spanish, and then I also speak German. So there's always a mix of different languages happening in our home, and also when we were in Texas for the last year and a half, for most of our life in Texas, we had partnerships with missionaries at the border, and oftentimes they would help immigrants with their paperwork, get across, put them on a bus, send them to our house. And so we have had so many immigrants live with us over the years, Russian immigrants, Honduran, Guatemalan. For a year and a half, we had a Venezuelan couple living with us. And so we were speaking more Spanish at home than English. And what I love about that for our kids, who are now 10 and 7, they are just so comfortable being in places where English is not spoken. They don't care. They just are not, you cannot bother them by what language is being spoken. And they'll pull out a game. They'll find something to do to interact with the other person when English, can't connect you. And I think that's one of the greatest blessings of living in the cross-cultural context that we have. And you're right, we have a very unique story, a unique family, unique experience that not everyone has. But I do encourage people to push yourself to, maybe it's you have young kids and you take your kids to a neighborhood playground where Spanish is spoken, or be part of a community or a church where other languages are spoken, just so that normalizes and that comfortability increases, so that you don't have that knee-jerk reaction of, well, they're not speaking English, therefore I'm going to make this and this assumption about them, right?
Yeah. One of the beautiful things, if you get a chance, if you get to go to some of the Hmong communities and see what's happening in some of the Hmong markets, you get a chance to see some of the ethnic markets that are around here. Minneapolis, St. Paul has such a rich community to be a part of. And so it's one of the things I love about our backyard, so to speak, is that when we step closer to the city or in the heart of the city or even in the suburbs, whether it's the Asia Mall or whatever it may be, there are these expressions in our community that allow us to interact in some credible ways. What I like about this is, so I planted a church back in 2006 in Tampa. And when living in the urban corridor of Tampa, the Hillsborough River came through our neighborhood. And we had what we called brackish water. It's where freshwater and saltwater overlap. And we would see, the species of both environments kind of interplay a little bit. Oftentimes, if a dolphin came up, you'd see some fish moving here or there, but when a shark came up, you'd see fish really trying to get out of the way. They knew it was coming. The point is, though, in brackish water, there was this interplay of interconnectivity, and then everybody went back home. Minneapolis, St. Paul provides a really unique, interwoven relational experience that if you take the city up on what it offers, you have a chance to go into the world by loving your neighbor. And so I want to get ready to wrap up, but let me just say, what are some final thoughts that you want to give us to encourage us towards a proximity of a relationship, or some final pieces that you want to put at our doorstep to start thinking about as followers of Jesus?
Yeah, so I wanted to throw one idea out because I resonate with the work that you're doing, church planting in an urban, diverse context, which is a lot of my husband and I's story. And I think one of the things that we just look back and laugh on is the fact that all of the literature and trainings that we read for church planting just utterly failed us because it was geared for suburban, wealthy white. And things like raising 100K, doing the coffee hours and the meet and greets with the pastor to test the market and do the soft launch and then the big launch, and spend thousands of dollars on flyers, canvassing the neighborhood. And we did all that, and it flopped big time because we were trying to reach a predominantly African American and Latino urban poor population, and they didn't care of none of that. We did a couple of coffee meet and greets at a high traffic street corner. No one came except for one homeless person that was like, "Hey, can I have a cup of coffee?" And they grabbed it and left. And so we kept inviting people to our church that we wanted to launch like months in the future, and they kept saying, "Well, if you're not meeting right now, you're not a church." And so we scrapped our big launch plan, and we just started meeting. We started meeting, inviting community leaders, breaking bread with people in the community. And that kind of became like a pipeline for inviting people to church. But the best recommendation, particularly in an urban context, that I can give that worked really well for us, that I've seen work really well for other churches in diverse contexts, is actually having a laundromat ministry. Get a bunch of quarters, get some breakfast food, and just start handing out to folks coming to the local laundromat, and use that as a way to get to know locals, build relationships, invite people to church. It's fun. First of all, it's fun, and it's strategic. And so I think for anyone, and maybe this can even be helpful for you, Danny, is thinking about how to meet sooner and start a laundromat ministry as a way to begin your cross-cultural engagement.
That's so good. That's so good. I appreciate you sharing that. I think the closer proximity that we move towards the community, meet a specific need and care for them. You know, my dad used to always say, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you know, it's so. My parents have all these little cliche things that fit really well on a sweatshirt or a coffee mug, but some of them are pretty true. And I think what you're speaking to though is the need of perhaps the majority culture church reminding that when we go and make disciples, it really starts with just a proximity towards people, unified in who we are around our mission in Jesus, but also unified about how we might build bridges with others. So let me say thank you, Dr. Reyes, for your voice, your heart, your witness, and just the power of cultural intelligence, being able to speak with a humility and a Christ-like attitude around unity. And let me say thank you to our listeners. And if something was said today that you enjoyed or you think might encourage and challenge others, even if it's uncomfortable, why don't you introduce them to our podcast and give them a moment to check, like, or share and get us involved in this process. So until next time, let's do what we do out of Galatians 5:25. Let's stay in step with the Spirit. God bless.